Thank you for joining, everyone. We're going to give it a couple more minutes before we get started.
Okay, Danielle, I think it'd be good to go ahead and get started. Get that? Okay. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm Dara Johnson with Access, and I'm here joined by my Access colleague, Danielle Ashclock. And then we also have Judy Ross, who's our colleague from SanData and HHA Exchange. And we're here today to go over with you the updated specifications for the alternate EVV vendors related to live-in caregiver. You can go to the next slide. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Everybody's going to be muted. That just helps us reduce any background noise and any disruptions. You can ask questions using the Q&A button. And if you see somebody asking a question that is similar to something that is that you're interested in, you can also give it a thumbs up. That'll just help us prioritize questions to be answered. We also are going to start off today with some Q&A. Some of you wrote in some questions, which we very much appreciate. So we're going to start the discussion today with those questions, and then if we have time, we will get to those in the chat. Next slide. So a little bit about the agenda for today. I'll give a brief overview of the background as sort of the impetus or the reasons why we've added the live-in caregiver requirements. I will talk about the policy and the business requirements related to this. And then Judy's going to go over the technical specifications. We've provided some screenshots for you and also linked to the full specifications document. And then both Judy and I will support with Q&A. There's some questions that came in related to more policy or business requirements. And then there's some that are technical, and so Judy will handle the technical items. And then before we leave today, also just want to remind you of other compliance reminders, things that we're monitoring as it relates to specifically some of the business requirements related to the data coming from alternate vendors. And so just want to use this as an opportunity to educate and share some information. I do want to highlight that, we've been communicating both about these changes as well as the upcoming, what we're calling the EVV 2.0 transition, which will occur on 10/1. And due to the nature of this call and the limited time we have on this call, we will not be addressing questions related to that transition. We had a communication that went out recently that is posted on our website, but we'll be having webinars like this in the near future to discuss that transition. Next slide. So a little bit about the background and why we want this data. Well, for many years, Access has been prioritizing workforce development and planning. We've been working with our health plans that include DDD and our EPD health plans to, and others, pretty much all lines of business for Access, related to monitoring workforce needs and addressing those workforce needs. And we know when it comes to long-term care and in-home care services that a large part of our workforce are family members. And oftentimes people that live with the member directly. And so this is our workforce that we're really trying to gather some more information about. It really supports planning and ensuring that members have access to care. And this is a large part of our workforce we just can't neglect and not have data on. And this has also always been a goal with us for EVV to utilize the EVV data to support all kinds of things, including workforce development planning. So this is just allowing us to enhance that. We also, many of you know that we've received new federal authority or permission from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, along with some recent state law that allows us to permit parents of minor children to get paid to provide care. We also know that there are many parents of adult children that are getting paid to provide care. And along with that new authority comes new requirements around reporting and other accountability for us as a state program and health plans. And so we want to make sure that we have the data available for those reports. And we highlighted here a couple of reference links to our waiver or agreement with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, along with the recent state law that went into effect, I believe, in April, for your reference if you want to take a look at those. Next slide. So a couple of things around the policy or business requirements. So these are expectations that we have of the provider agencies. And that we have set a deadline for September 30th for the provider agencies to be in a position to identify within their respective EVV systems which direct care workers are live-in caregivers and then what that relationship is to the member. So this means that your vendors have to have the completed development work. You as provider agencies need to be entering that data, and then the vendor needs to be transmitting the data to SANdata ahead of September 30th. Once that functionality is available to you, anytime you have a new employee that has a live-in caregiver relationship with a member, we want you to update that information within 30 days of hire. That's consistent with some of our other requirements around like the direct care worker database and things like that for those specific services. So we wanted to be consistent with that. I also cannot stress enough that the integrity of this data and the completeness of this data relies on the fact that we can identify the direct care worker. And so one of the things we really want to stress is that we need the full, complete, and correct SSN or Social Security number of the direct care worker. That's already a requirement in the specifications today. It always has been. But as we've been looking at data, we've been seeing numbers that are clearly made up. And that may be because for whatever reason, it may not have been entered at the time that we received the visit data, but we really need to make sure that we are being mindful of this and making sure that information is completely secure. And we have an FAQ related to that, but we need to make sure that we have that complete and accurate Social Security number of the direct care worker. So we've provided 2 references here. There are others on our website, but the main reference related to when we talk about the policy and business requirements is a document that's linked here, which is a companion document to the technical specifications. So what it really does is help provider agencies as well as vendors have an understanding of how the policy requirements, so what's required to comply with EVV, is translated into the data requirements. And so we've updated it to include the live-in caregiver required information. I can't stress enough that both provider agencies and vendors need to be reviewing this document to ensure that, yes, the data is being submitted in the right format and when and how it needs to be submitted, but also that the data is consistent with the expectations around the policy and business requirements. So we have not made a ton of changes to these requirements over the years. Most of these have been pretty much set in place. We've offered some clarifications in the document, and that is footnoted. But please, I can't stress it enough to make sure that you are reviewing that document and have that available to you. The other thing is that in the Access Medical Policy Manual, the 1240A, which is the direct care services policy, that is currently actually through the end of today is out for public comment, and we have added some language in there regarding the requirements to input the live-in caregiver data consistent with what I just shared with you. So you want to make sure that you're also referencing that to maintain compliance with that specific access policy as well. Next slide, and I think I can transition it over to Judy to talk about the technical requirements.
Absolutely. Thank you. And just so you understand, I'm taking a look at the questions that have been posted. This is a requirement for all providers who are providing EVV services under the Arizona program. This is not a specific SANDATA requirement. This is a global requirement for the program. So what you're going to see, what you're going to receive with the updated specifications is the definition of how to provide that information, but that's also that's intended really for any third party who is sending data to today the aggregator system or in the future to the new system. So essentially, we have added to the Alt EVV specification, and please forgive me if I'm getting a little too technical, we've added a fourth thing or a fourth interface or a fourth transmission. So today in your Alt EVV transmission, there are 3 things you send us. You send us the client, you send us the employee, you send us the visit. And if, I'm sure most of you have experienced that if you send us a visit where we don't already have the employee or the client, member, recipient, whatever we choose to call it, we won't accept the visit because we don't know who it's for. What we've done is we've added a fourth thing, if you will, a fourth interface, a fourth interface that you'll be sending us. That fourth thing is, and it's kind of footnoted as XREF, but you can think of it as cross-reference. What the cross-reference does is it relates the client or member, the caregiver who is authorized for those services, the services they can provide, and the start and end date. So that way, the state has that information available to them so they understand who is receiving services from a live-in. Now, again, the same as with a visit. If we receive a cross-reference, the client and the employee must already have been sent and successfully received. So we will not accept a cross-reference if you send us a client and employee that we simply can't associate with anybody. But effectively, when you send us that cross-reference, assuming we know the client and the employee, we will create that relationship or that cross-reference. That cross-reference in the SANDATA system will be informational only. It won't be used to do anything within the system processing other than being available for reporting, for inspection, et cetera. And again, how the state uses that, I defer to Dara. And again, there is a reference here to the specifications. Did we paste in some of that information? Do we have another slide?
Yep. I
Thank
just
you.
pasted in.
That's perfect. So what we're looking at on this next slide is literally how we transmit the data. So this is from the top. And what we've added is in red. So if you are testing, and again, if you are a third-party vendor, if you are a larger agency provider who is doing their own interface, we have both a UAT and a production, and these are called endpoints. Endpoints are essentially where you would direct that data. So in UAT, you have a UAT endpoint. In production, you have a production endpoint, and that is where you would send that information to in order for us to accept it. And these have been added to the document, so they are available for use. And next slide, please. So what you'll see here, and there's a whole section on the XREF data endpoint. And again, it is its own object, its own endpoint, its own thing. And again, you would tell us that this is a client custom ID. You would give us the format of the client ID. It is the same client ID you should be sending us on your other interfaces. So that way we can relate the client you're sending here to the client you've already sent us. Same thing with the employee. So we are requesting that you send us that this is the employee's social security number. We are asking for the full 9-digit social security number. And again, you send us the literal word employee SSN where it says qualifier, and you send us the 9-digit social security number. Again, that way we can match the employee on the interface to the employee you've already sent us. So this is what lets us do that mapping or that cross-reference. Next, please. And again, it's, basically you tell us that it is a live-in. So one would assume that all of these are simply going to say yes. Again, there would be no reason to send us a no in this field. And then, of course, the relationship. And again, this is, informational. It is not required. It is up to the state policy if they wish to require it from you. But basically, those are the acceptable values if you are sending it. So you can tell us that this is the son-in-law, this is the grandchild, this is the sibling, etc. And again, I defer to Dara and the state if that's a required element. And
when, yep, I'll just jump in there, Judy, to say that it's required when there's a live-in caregiver relationship that exists. But you do not send the data if there is no live-in caregiver relationship, which is why it's in the technical specifications, it says it's not required because it's optional because it's only required when it exists. So that's kind of how that's a good example of how like the policy requirements and the technical specifications kind of work off one another. So thank you, Judy. I'll go into the Q&A that we received ahead of the meeting related to the policy, and then we'll let you answer the technical one. So we can go to the next slide. So here's some questions that we received that really speak more to the policy as far as what's required. So we actually pulled these. These are direct quotes from the surveys that you all sent to us with your questions, which we greatly appreciate. So the first bullet is, if your organization does not employ live-in caregivers, will we still be required to send the XREF data endpoint with all the elements? And just say that no, basically it doesn't apply. No, you do. If there is not a live-in caregiver relationship that exists, then the XREF is not required or necessary. We don't want you to do something that is just busy work. We only need it when there is a live-in caregiver relationship. I will say that unless your agency has a policy not to employ live-in caregivers, it's likely that is going to happen in the future. And so you just need to be aware of it so that if and when that does occur, you are compliant by sending that information. The next question is, how will the system distinguish between live-in caregivers and guardians providing services to minors? So Danielle, I'm going to ask you to go back a couple of slides where it has a list. It's part of Judy's slides. You can go back. There we go. So as part of the technical specifications, you say, yes, the live-in caregiver relationship exists, and then you identify the relationship. So, and you can see to the right, the far right column, it says the expected value. So here are the options, including there's an other option. There could be a relationship that exists with somebody, like it could be roommate or something. But if somebody is falls into the category of a parent, adoptive parent, or legal guardian, you would select that category. And so that's kind of one category in and of itself. Or if the person is a step parent but may not be a legal guardian, then or have adopted the child, then you would just say step parent. So you will then select those items from that list that is the most appropriate. If there is a situation where like the grandparent is the legal guardian, then we want you to select the parent, adoptive parent, or legal guardian because there are specific requirements with the parents as paid caregiver waiver and the state law that that have some limitations. So we want to make sure that that legal guardian is selected. And we'll put this all in an FAQ, but just wanted to kind of highlight that we do have designated relationships. Then if we can go back, Danielle. All right. Right now, billing codes reflect the type of live-in provider versus non-live-in, then by family versus non-family. I have live-in family caregivers that are not parents as paid caregiver, but are a live-in provider for a minor child. How will date only checking live-in with the family versus non-family? So kind of going back to what we just said, that you will select the right relationship, and it's in the reporting where we will be able to identify if the member is a minor, if the live-in caregiver relationship is a parent, and then it's through the reporting mechanism where we will see that data. As Judy mentioned, this is like an informational only data point. We don't validate claims based upon it or anything like that. It's informational only, but we use that information to generate reports that then allow, if you're a provider agency, to monitor if you have anybody that's subject to that 40-hour weekly limitation because they are a parent and they are and then of a minor child. And then it's also just general reporting that helps agencies kind of monitor their overall workforce. So the last bullet on page 26, indexes 5 and 6, it asks us to define the start date of the relationship. So again, that's on the technical specification. So this is a great question. Be more specific about that. So the start date, it could be the date the individual was officially hired by the agency, or it could be the date of the first shift. We're flexible with that, but it must be before the actual visit occurs. So that's really key. It's got to be before the actual first visit. You can't have a start date of, let's say, July 11th and the care is being provided on July 9th. So, but we're flexible whether you want to use that to be the hire date, or it could be the date of the first shift. But it does have to be, at minimum, it has to be the date of the first shift. And I think there's one more option for us in the policy. One more question, I'm sorry. Next slide. When it's stated that vendors must begin submitting the living caregiver data to send data during the first quarter of the state fiscal year, does this imply that we are required to submit all historical XREF data from July 1st onward? No, you can submit at whatever point your vendor has the work completed and you can go in and input the data. It would be whatever is true from that date. That would be the relationships that you have to identify. So we don't need you to go back in time. We just need you to start from that date onward. Great question. And Judy, I will turn it over to you to look at some of the first questions that we received. Technical.
I'd actually like, before we dive into those, can you go back to where it had those relationship values? I just want to clarify something. So where you see expected value, the expected values need to be exactly what's there. Now, that includes, by the way, so if it's a son-in-law or daughter-in-law, that is one single expected value. So it would be son-in-law space dash daughter-in-law. So it has to be exactly what's there. We are validating those values. So again, just wanted to be clear because the dash in between could be interpreted as either or. It's both. Just to be clear on that one, make sure there's clarity around that. So thank you, Danielle, or Derry. You can go back to the technical questions. I just figured I'd jump on that right away. What is the expected structure for XREF submissions? Should each XREF represent a unique combination? Yes. And I believe it also includes the procedure code. So basically, when you look at the specification, you'll see the required fields. You need to submit all of those. And again, they are part of the same API that we currently receive. It is what's called JSON, which is the format, if you will, of the transmission. So we would expect it to be received as a JSON API transmission. And if that sounds like a weird set of letters, I apologize, but that's the answer to the question. Can an XREF be submitted independently of visit data, or must they be transmitted prior to any visit involving the associated client staff pair? Great question. Honestly, the XREF could be received at any time. It's obviously best if you can send it as soon as that relationship is created. But since it's only informational, it won't impact your ability to send visits, to send clients and employees, to send visits, to get visits to a verified status. The only thing it's going to do is provide information to the state. And again, they would be using that, just to validate that those relationships exist. So yes, they are completely independent of the visit data, but I suspect that if you asked Dara, she'd tell you she'd like to see them before the visits begin. Given the XREF data endpoint is presented as a completely separate section within the specifications, I would like to confirm whether this implies that it should be submitted as a separate file. Yes. So we talked about that before, where we have member, caregiver, visit, and cross-reference. They are all at the same level. They are all independent, although they are interrelated, as we talked about before. I'm not sure how that's unlike our other interfaces. Again, this uses the same methodology as sending the other three elements. It's just a fourth element. And the addendum does not mention a status checking endpoint for XREF submissions. Is there an available mechanism to query the status or acknowledgement of XREF transmissions? I believe you would get it on the same, but I will take that one back to our development team. You're correct. That was not in there. I will validate that.
Thank you, Judy. And then we will try to get my camera back on. We will, when we get that clarification, we will update our FAQs and we'll send those out along with the Q&A that's happening today. We'll update with our FAQs. Before we get into the Q&A, the chat that you all have been submitting questions, thank you. I do want to highlight that when I talked about the information is being used to help with reporting, there are currently reports available in the Send Data Aggregator today that help with looking at the client, that highlight the client relationship to the employee and the employee relationship to the client, and then also look at daily and weekly hours worked. So those reports are currently available. Obviously, if your vendor does not yet have this functionality and you haven't input the data yet, it's not going to show anything in the reports for your provider agency. We do have Send Data has this functionality in their system, so Send Data users can go in and see this data and these aggregator reports, and or any vendor who's been able to put anything together before in this short time. But once you, as a provider, input the data, your vendor has the functionality, you input the data, you'll be able to start seeing data in these reports. So I've got a list of questions here. I'm going to kind of walk through these. If they've been addressed, I'm going to just kind of bypass them for the sake of time. Somebody asked, does this apply only to live-in caregivers of minor children? No. We want any live-in caregiver relationship. We want this information. Somebody asked, what's the difference between parents, adoptive parents, and legal guardians? So we just kind of lumped all those relationships together as one option because those are individuals who have legal responsibility to provide care. So it does help us identify those relationships that might qualify for the parents as paid caregiver requirements specifically. Somebody asked, why do you need this information if you're already utilizing the U4 and U5 modifiers, which those are service code modifiers when providers bill for services that allow and designate whether or not the individual providing the service lives with the member or does not live with the member. It does not tell us the specific relationship. And so for some of the monitoring that we have to do related to our new waiver authority in the state law, we have to know specific relationships. So that's why we can't rely on the modifiers necessarily, because it doesn't tell us what that relationship actually is. Why can't we just use a parents as paid caregiver modifier? Well, it's partly because we don't just want this information related to parents as paid caregiver. As I explained before, family caregivers or living caregivers are very common in our state because of our flexibilities. And so we want to be able to have more detailed data to support workforce development planning and to know more about our workforce that's providing care. Give me a second. How can this be used to check for the parents' paid caregiver 40-hour limit if we are sending the live-in information? It's in the reporting, as I mentioned, that will allow us to view how many hours per day and how many weekly hours are being worked by those individuals that have that specific living caregiver relationship where they're a parent of a minor child. So it's in the reporting aspect where we will see, be able to analyze the data to identify those circumstances. Okay, I think this question is, Judy, for you. If a client receives 2 different services and they have a living caregiver, do we need to send this interface request for both services?
Yes.
And from a policy standpoint, yes, because we need to have it at the service level.
Correct. And again, we would accept that as 2 different cross-references. And then, it's really, again, that information goes back to the state.
Okay. We have a comment. I think it looks like it's from a vendor. It says that they've submitted a request and have had to open a ticket. So I don't know. Stephen, if you want to give us that ticket number, we can look into that, and Judy can look into that if you want to put that in your comments or send it to us directly. Okay, I'm trying to stick to questions that relate to the living caregiver information. How would the state know the caregiver is a living caregiver? Would they only know when the cross-reference segment is sent and tells the user is a living caregiver for that recipient? Yes, I mean, outside of the modifiers being utilized for the services when those claims are submitted, this is why we have to ask you for it. We don't know otherwise. Carlos is saying, can she, I'm assuming Judy, say the 4 transmission again, or speak about the 4, I'm assuming maybe the 4 endpoints?
Correct. So, and again, if you're not the coder, this will be much more familiar to whoever is the technical person on the call or the technical person you're working with. The way that an API works, you can construct you construct what we call the document in what's called a JSON format. So you would construct a client, an employee, a visit, and an extract. Those are 4 separate things. If you're already using the interface, you're already using the first 3. When you construct that document and trying to technologize this a little bit, I'm not sure that's a word, but what you do is you take that document and you throw it at the endpoint. So if it's a client, you throw it at the client endpoint. And that way, a client going to the client endpoint, if you send it to the wrong endpoint, we immediately know that's wrong and we'll reject it. We've added that 4th endpoint so you can construct that JSON document and throw that at the endpoint. So that's why you've got 4 separate endpoints, 4 separate JSON files or documents that you would be that your vendor would be constructing and sending to the interface or to the endpoint. Does that help?
I think that's what they were asking for, Judy.
Okay.
Thank you. Question, is this requirement for send data only, or are other EVV vendors requiring this as well? So it's already functionality in the SAN data system, but the reason why we're having the webinar today and why we have updated the technical specifications are for all the other EVV vendors that are serving Arizona providers today. So it's required for everyone. Let's see. Trying to see if sorry, I'm just looking through the list. We are recording today's session. We are posting the PowerPoint, which has all the links to it. We are also be updating. We have a live-in caregiver FAQ, and we will update that with the Q&A from today's call. And we'll send notification out broadly to the EVV listserv or constant contact once those things are posted. Okay. Oh, Michelle's asking with relation to the aggregator reports, what's the difference between client to employee and employee to client? So it's basically the same report. It's just highlighting which clients have relationships with which employees, and then it just does the opposite of which employees. So depending upon how the provider wants to look at it, we just did both, but it's essentially the same report.
And sorry to interrupt. I'm just confirming the exact spacing and details of the relationship. I will post it into the chat. I'm just going back and forth with one of our engineers just to make sure you have the exact casing. Again, I will post it in another minute or two.
Thank you, Judy. And we'll get it in the FAQs, and we can also update the business requirements doc and put that in there just to make it another place where it's more accessible. Thank you. Eli has a question. What are some specific examples of workforce development that this data will be used for? So good question. Our health plans have to do planning around workforce development. And by that, we mean making sure that our providers, in addition to being competent to provide care, so they do focus on things like training and other aspects of service delivery, but they also look at, do we have enough people to do the work? And so what EVV allows us to do is to see data around, particularly with some of the scheduling requirements, to see when there are visits that occur that are missed. And then, so some of this data helps us look at, well, is that member live-in caregiver? Is it somebody else? Are we seeing patterns? And most of it's aggregated data. So when I say aggregated, meaning we're looking at it kind of at a high level, like systems level, like what are the patterns of service delivery that we see versus live-in caregivers versus not? Where do we see where there might be some unmet needs, and we might be able to try to look at patterns of sometimes the health plans can look over visit data for members and see that they've had multiple direct care workers, so that could show potentially instability. So that would be like outside of the live-in caregiver aspect. So there's lots of ways the data can be used to really ultimately like support the system and support providers overall in having support around recruitment and retention. So it's really data to overall just help give us insight into, we all know direct care workers, right? There's a huge need for them, but we can also see like, have we seen any patterns of changes around the types of workers, whether they have these live-in caregiver relationships or not, or are we seeing a larger number volume of direct care workers, which would be good, right? But are they staying around? So we can compare that to visit data to see if we're seeing longer longevity with direct care workers. So the possibilities are really endless, but this is sort of a piece of the puzzle that we've made assumptions about given the service code modifiers that people have talked about, but we haven't been able to get to the data to the level that we've wanted to, and had to make some assumptions. And so those are some of the ways that we'll be looking at it, utilizing it. And I see Judy, you put that in the chat.
Yes. I thought it would be
Okay,
easier for somebody who's writing to the specification to have something that's maybe perhaps a little easier. And it does match what's in the specification. I just don't know if you have a PDF, if you're not comfortable, those are the exact values to send.
Thank you. So let's move to, with our 15 minutes left, let's just move to the next slide. I'm just going to cover these things pretty generally. So now that we've kind of matured with EVV over the years, and we've had an opportunity, meaning not only the health plans, but Access, and also partnerships with SendData, HHA Exchange, and other vendors, we've had an opportunity to really see where we have more opportunity to do better. And so some of the things that we are looking at as far as, and I talked earlier about, just because you can send data in the format that you need to, when you need to, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're meeting all the compliance requests. And so it's really important to go back again and look at that business requirements document, whether you're a vendor or a provider who's contracting with a vendor, to see what are all the different things that we have to comply with. So one of the things is we have not established a timeline for how often you should send the data. But as we get more involved with reporting, this becomes more critical. So one of the things that we're going to be monitoring over, the next few months and beyond is how often vendors are sending data. We have some vendors that aren't sending data, that are sending data like once a month. We have others that are doing it every day. So, our preferred cadence is no less than weekly, because what happens is when we start to do reporting, if we have a lot of vendors not submitting data for like an entire month, that really limits our reporting capability, and we then have to kind of do look backs and things like that. So, we understand not everything's quote unquote real time, but so that is something, if you're a vendor, to consider, and if you're a provider, that's something to consider too. Like, you should know how often your vendor's sending data to the aggregator. Something else that's really, really important, because this also relates to our compliance reporting with CMS. And I think there's been improvement in this area. We've talked about this before, so I definitely think there's been improvement. So those of you who've been mindful of that, thank you. But we really need to see the entire life cycle of the visit, because we still have providers, when we look at your visit data, it says 100% auto-verified. That means 100% of the time, you're capturing all the visit data at the point of care. Now, I think that's pretty impossible, because life happens, things happen, people can't clock in, something happens, right? So that really shouldn't be something we're seeing. We want to be able to look at reality, and it's important for us to know reality in order for us, and having all of the edits and everything to the visit, so that we know, as we start to look at potentially developing performance targets for the percentage of visits that should be auto-verified, meaning they're kind of perfect, versus those that have had to have updates, we need to have a good picture of what's reality. But if we have people submitting, 100% auto-verified visits, and that's consistently how it is all the time, that's an indication to us that we're not getting all of that. So we're looking into that. Again, we want good data to make good decisions and make informed decisions. We also want to reemphasize, pretty much nobody's sending the rescheduling indicator. When a schedule has been rescheduled, we want that indicator. It helps us look at the scheduling data. We understand you probably have questions related to these things, and we want to answer those. So we will be having some future webinars focusing on specific topics both for the providers and for the vendors, so that we can talk through these. And then if there's some limitation on our end, then we can have those conversations, but and talk through them. But just wanted to kind of put you on notice, if you will, that these are things that are important to us, and we want you to start looking at your data and how you submit data to see where you might fall with some of these compliance things that we are looking at. And we provided 2 links to FAQs that we have on our website where you can get more information around our expectations on these items, in addition to what's in the business requirements document that's the companion to the technical specifications. Just looking to see if there's any just a couple of, I'm just moving through the questions here. Okay, let's see. Many agencies have caregivers employed that care for more than one member that live in the same house with them, but may fall under a different category. Yep. Is this going to be a problem? Nope. That's reality. That's what's happening. So we just need you to send that XREF for that specific client caregiver relationship for that service. So not a problem at all. It is not an issue that we have living caregivers. That's a flexibility and something that kind of demonstrates the member-directed delivery system that we have. But in some cases also just kind of focuses on the realities, right, of the direct care workforce needs. So there's nothing wrong. We're not asking for this data because we think there's something wrong about it. We're just asking for this data to have this information that we can utilize. So no, we understand there are multiple members who live in households who may have different caregivers, or there may be the same caregiver that has a different relationship with one versus the other. So that's totally fine and expected. Okay. I think all the other related questions are pretty much, hold on here, I'm looking at this question. I already answered that question. Just want to clarify, you only need to submit the XREF once. So when that relationship exists, you submit it. And then if there's a change in the relationship, meaning there's like an end date, meaning there's that relationship no longer exists from like between the DCW and the member, then you would put an end date. Or if for some reason the relationship changed, which would probably be not so common, but potentially maybe a living caregiver was a roommate and is now a spouse. So that could potentially be a change. So you only send it initially when that relationship exists, and then you submit it when there's been a change in the relationship or an end date to the relationship. Can we send living caregiver data before July 1st for older visits, or is this applicable? I think, Sandata, you can accept this data. So if it's for a relationship, if it's for visit data that applies before July 1st, is that an issue? I would think that it would not be an issue. I mean, you don't have to send it for anything before July 1st. So, and in fact, you don't even have it. You only need to start sending it when your EVV system has the capability and functionality to send it. But Sendata is ready and able to receive that data. Question for you, Judy. Are those values case sensitive?
Yes, they need to be sent exactly as you see them.
Okay.
And that includes spaces, dashes. That's why I posted them into the chat, so that way you have exactly what we're expecting.
Okay. Okay, I think we have addressed everything. So we, again, I'm not going to address questions that relate to the 10-1 transition. We will have much more communication here shortly and engagement around that. But there is in our latest communication regarding that. We also did include a survey link for you to raise questions. So that is a place where maybe Danielle can put that link in the chat here while we're finishing up. If you do have questions about the transition for 10-1, please add them to that document. That is what we use to help update FAQs and other things. We will also be taking the information and Q&A from today's session to update the live-in caregiver FAQ. And we'll get those out and we'll send notification when those have been posted to the website. Great questions, you guys. Great, phenomenal questions. Appreciate the engagement. Thank you for, participating and being partners with us in EVV. We know it's not everybody's favorite thing necessarily, but I appreciate the fact that people are looking at ways to innovate and utilize the data for other things than just what's needed for compliance with the federal law. So we continue to partner with you. We look forward to engaging with you again here in the near future. And I want to thank Judy from Send Data HHA Exchange for being our technical expert today and being on this call, and appreciate your time and effort. And final.
Let me just jump in for 1 second. I've just posted, we had a question earlier about can you check the status? I've just posted the link to check the status based on the UUID. So again, for those of you who might be technical, or for your technical folks, if you can hand that, and they should understand it.
Judy, is that something we can update in the specs and then get those posted? So is that something that normally goes in the specification document? Or no?
Probably. Again, we could update it. Again, it's 6 of one, half dozen the other.
Okay.
I just don't want people, I don't want any of the vendors waiting to begin delivery or to begin development to get any updates to the specification. I don't want to hold anything up. So that's why I posted it, because again, if somebody's technical, that should more than answer that question. Should it be in the spec in the long run? Probably. But again, don't want to hold up anybody from forward progress.
Okay. We can add it as we can, and we'll include it in the FAQ document too.
Yep.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Danielle, for manning the ship. And again, we'll post the video online along with the PowerPoint, which we can do fairly quickly, and then we will work to get the other documents updated. Thank you, everybody.